They brought fire, guns, and numbers, thinking it'd be easy. But Luther didn't run. He fought back with silence, precision, and the instincts of a man who's ended wars. The sun had barely started to rise over Val Verde County when Luther Gaines stepped out onto the porch, a black mug of coffee in his hand and a shotgun leaned quietly against the wall behind him. He wasn't paranoid. He was trained. 62 years old, lean frame, heavy hands, skin weathered like the wood of the house behind him. Most folks in the area knew him only as the quiet farmer who never missed a Sunday at Big Wells Hardware and never said more than he needed to. But a few miles away, across the border, across the river, people who knew his real name still flinched when they heard it. He didn't talk about the past, not with strangers, not with the sheriff, not even with the VA counselor who came around once a year asking polite questions. To them, he was just Luther. A man who bought 80 acres of land 6 years ago, paid cash, put up a gate, and kept to himself. But there were things Luther noticed that other people wouldn't. Like how the crows started nesting in the south tree line a month too early. Or how the tire tracks near his north fence didn't match any of the local farmers' trucks. Or how the wild dogs had stopped barking at night, like something bigger had claimed the land. Something was off, and Luther felt it in his bones. He walked the perimeter that morning like he always did. Didn't matter that his right knee still stiffened from an injury in Kandahar. Didn't matter that the sun was already beating down on the Texas dirt like a hammer. It was habit, and habits had kept him alive longer than most of his unit. Near the edge of the irrigation ditch, he found it. Boot prints. Not one set. 3. All fresh. He crouched down, ran a finger across the edge. Recent. Weight distribution told him they were armed. Heavy enough for long rifles or body armor. Not hunters, not farmhands. They weren't careful. That was their first mistake. Luther stood still for a long while, letting the wind push through the mesquite trees. Insects buzzed in the distance. From the hilltop, you could see straight into Mexico. The river was low this season, easy to cross if you knew where to look. He'd heard stories from nearby ranchers about smugglers cutting fences or dumping bundles in the brush. Most people just called the sheriff and kept quiet. But Luther had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He'd taken down targets in the middle of cities without spilling a drop of innocent blood. He'd gone 3 weeks in a jungle in Nicaragua, surviving on beetles and water runoff. He'd been the one who cleaned up other people's mistakes. Quick, silent, gone before the press ever got wind of it. He wasn't scared. He was prepared. As he stepped back toward the house, he glanced at the side shed, where the old barnwood hid more than feed and tools. Everything looked untouched. For now. He pulled out his flip phone. Still had only 4 numbers programmed. The hardware store, the local vet, a man named Reuben back in Louisiana, and the county sheriff. He thought about calling one, maybe just reporting the prints. But no. He needed more than prints. He needed a pattern. Luther wasn't reckless. That was their second mistake. Back on the porch, he poured the last of his coffee out into the grass. It hissed against the dry dirt. Trouble had found him, but it didn't know what kind of man it had just stepped toward. But a few miles away, a different kind of meeting was happening, one that would send the first ripple toward Luther's fence. Across the river in Coahuila, inside a warehouse that had once stored grain but now reeked of diesel, sweat, and gun oil, Mateo Rojas paced slowly in front of a folding table. His boots echoed against the concrete floor, the sound broken only by the low murmur of his men, laughing as they passed around a jug of mezcal. Someone was cleaning a rifle. Someone else was loading magazines with bright copper rounds. Mateo didn't like to repeat himself, but he had to be sure. He stopped pacing and pointed to a map spread out across the table. "That stretch of land," he said, tapping a finger against the satellite image. "It's open. No patrols. No cameras. One old man, that's all. The man he was talking to. Luis, broad shoulders, snake tattoo on his neck, gave a lazy shrug. "You sure he's alone?" Mateo gave him a hard look. "You scared of one old man?" "No, Jefe. Just asking." Mateo snorted. "Then stop asking. Our last 2 runs got interrupted. The Federales are watching the river crossing near Acuña. We push through here. He stabbed the image again. We hit the drop in Bracketville by morning. Easy. He didn't mention the dead scout 2 weeks ago. They'd found him halfway across the river, lungs full of water, but no visible wounds. His gun was missing, and his pack was gone. Everyone had blamed the current. But Mateo had a rule. If the route gets interrupted twice, it's cursed or it's guarded. Either way, he needed a new one. The route through Luther Gaines' property looked wide open. Flatland, clear lines of sight, and most importantly, quiet. Luis leaned over the map, squinting. What about this? Gaines' farm. Some of the locals say he's ex-military. Mateo shrugged. Everyone's ex-military in Texas. That don't mean anything. There was laughter around the room. One of the younger men, Tavo, chimed in with a grin. What's he gonna do, throw beans at us? Mateo smiled without humor. You can laugh when we make the drop. Until then, stay sharp. He had been running loads across the border for 8 years. Started small, tires, electronics, mules packed with meth. Now he moved cargo that didn't always breathe. And he was good at it. But Mateo had a weakness, one he didn't know he carried. He underestimated men who didn't talk. As his crew dispersed to pack up gear and check vehicles, Mateo walked outside into the heat. The warehouse sat on a patch of dry land ringed with low trees and dirt tracks carved by years of smuggling. His convoy was almost ready. 2 trucks with hidden compartments, 1 van for backup, and 4 motorcycles for speed and scouting. He lit a cigarette, stared across the brush toward the border. That old man's land didn't look like much. He'd driven by once, just a mile off the main route. Nothing but rows of corn, a few chickens, and a rusted mailbox with L. Gaines painted in faded white letters. No cameras, no fences worth mentioning, no barking dogs, no hired hands. Mateo had seen a lot of frontmen, ranchers who took money to look the other way. This one didn't even seem to know what was coming. That made him a non-factor. 3 men tonight, Mateo said aloud, not turning around. Luis had walked up behind him. Luis raised an eyebrow. You want them to make contact? No. I want them to walk the land. Watch. Listen. Just make sure it's clear. Don't wake him up. Don't fire a shot. Luis hesitated. And if he sees them? Then he sees them. What's he gonna do? Call the sheriff? Mateo flicked ash onto the dirt. Let him. We'll be gone by then. He turned and looked Luis in the eye. We hit the trail in 2 nights. That land is ours now. But Mateo didn't know the man sleeping behind that rusted mailbox had once trained others to kill with silence, and who never left anything to chance. The next morning, Luther found the wire cut clean through, barbed, twisted and curled like it had been sliced with bolt cutters. Not torn, not chewed by coyote. Intentional, surgical, the way someone would do it if they didn't want to be heard. He crouched beside the brake, eyes scanning the dirt. The wind wasn't strong enough to erase tracks overnight. And sure enough, there they were. 3 sets again. Same deep heel impression, same spacing. They had walked in, stayed for a while, and left the same way they came. Only now they weren't guessing, they were measuring. Luther exhaled through his nose, not in anger, not in fear, in calculation. He walked the trail back toward the house. Silent, one hand brushing over the heads of tall grass. He didn't look like much to outsiders, a man in a sweat-stained shirt, old boots, calloused fingers. But behind that calm face, gears were turning. By the time he stepped back onto the gravel drive, he already had the perimeter mapped out in his head. Entry points, coverage angles, trapping lanes. Old instincts stirred, not with excitement, but necessity. He didn't want a war, but if it came, he wasn't going to lose. Inside the shed, Luther pulled down a wooden crate marked Tools. Inside weren't wrenches or bolts, just a long cloth roll tied with leather cord. He unwrapped it slowly. M9, cleaned, oiled, 2 extra mags, 4 stun grenades, paracord, a KA bar knife with a notch near the base from some night in Mosul. He ran his fingers over the grip of the pistol like it was a forgotten language. It didn't feel heavy. It felt familiar. There was a time when violence had been a job, not for revenge, not for glory, just orders, missions, extract and disappear. And now, years later, that same skill set might be the only thing keeping him alive. His phone vibrated on the shelf. The screen lit up. "Ruben, LA." He answered on the second ring. "Talk. You get that package I sent?" Ruben's voice was low, gruff, another name nobody whispered in polite company. "Yeah. You sound like you already opened it. I might need it." A pause. "You expecting company?" "They already stopped by. Didn't knock." Another pause. Heavier this time. Then, "Want me to come down?" "No. I need quiet. And you talk too much." Ruben chuckled dryly. "Still mean as hell." "Still breathing. You call if you need bodies." "I will." Luther hung up. No goodbyes. He stood there in the shed, the dust drifting through beams of light. There was a strange clarity to all of it, like the quiet before a storm, not of fear, but awareness, like a dog that knows the air's about to break. He went outside, took a shovel, and started working the dirt beneath the back fence. A little deeper each day, just enough to tuck something in, something metal. He'd bury 2 flashbangs in a trap just beyond the gate. If they stepped wrong, it wouldn't kill them, but they wouldn't be standing either. As he worked, a truck rumbled down the distant road. He turned his head slightly but didn't pause. Just a rancher heading into town. Normal. Routine. But normal didn't mean safe. Later that night, just before the sun fell behind the hills, Luther walked the fence line again. He moved slow, but he saw everything. A broken branch, a scuffed rock, a crushed beer can left under the gatepost that hadn't been there yesterday. Sloppy. That was mistake number 3. Back in the house, he sat in the dark. No lights on, windows open. He ate cold beans from the can and listened. Frogs in the distance. An owl. And once a twig snapping too cleanly near the west corner of the field. He didn't grab the gun. Not yet. He wanted to see how bold they'd get. But if the men creeping through his field thought Luther Gaines was just an old man with a shotgun, they were about to learn how far off they really were. At 2:14 a.m., Luther opened his eyes. He hadn't been asleep. Not really. His body had trained itself to rest light, even after retirement. He heard it. A slight metallic click. Not close. Not far, either. Like someone stepping onto the old irrigation grates near the east crop line. He didn't move fast. Just deliberate. Quiet. Bare feet on wooden floor. One step at a time. He reached under the bed, pulled out a soft cloth-wrapped bundle, and unrolled it on the nightstand. Inside, the M9 he'd prepped earlier. Full mag. Chamber empty. Always. He racked the slide once. Soft, controlled, and tucked the pistol into the back of his waistband. Outside, the moon was sharp and bright, casting shadows that moved too easily. Luther didn't bother with shoes. He wanted to feel the ground. Know it. Own it. As he stepped off the porch, the air was cool and still. No wind, no bugs. That meant something was nearby. Most folks never noticed silence until it was forced on them. He moved along the south fence, where the corn grew higher than a man's chest. His breath was even. His steps matched the beat of the night. Slow, low, almost invisible. Then he saw them. 3 shapes, moving low between the rows. They weren't farmers, and they weren't lost. They weren't armed like military either. No coordination, no overwatch. But they had weapons. One had a scoped AK slung low. Another carried bolt cutters, glinting in the moonlight. They hadn't seen him yet. He crouched behind a water tank and watched. They weren't professionals. They were used to moving through fear. Used to people freezing when they showed up. They didn't expect to be watched. The man with the AK paused near the old scarecrow, looked around, then muttered in Spanish. "He ain't even got lights on," the one with the bolt cutters snorted. "Probably drunk or dead." The third man, a younger one, shifted nervously. I don't like this. Feels wrong. Luther smiled to himself. The kid was right. He let them move. Didn't confront. Didn't shoot. He wanted to see their rhythm. How they searched. How they retreated. It told him what kind of crew he was dealing with. This wasn't just a smash and grab. This was recon. They were testing the lines. He watched them until they vanished toward the north fence, then melted into the trees. He waited. 20 minutes later, they were gone. Back in the house, Luther poured himself a shot of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. The glass was heavy in his hand, not from weight, but from memory. He didn't drink often anymore, but sometimes it helped settle the line between then and now. He didn't like being hunted. The next morning he visited town. Big Wells wasn't much, just a gas station, a diner, and a hardware store run by a man named Colton Ruiz, who'd known Luther long enough not to ask dumb questions. "Need anything, Luther?" Colton asked as Luther picked out some cable ties, gloves, and a roll of steel mesh. "Just maintenance." Colton nodded. "Storm season coming?" Luther didn't respond. Just paid in cash and walked out. Back home he spent the day turning his property into a blueprint. He mapped out every tree, ditch, corner, and line of sight. Dug shallow trenches behind rows of corn. Installed a tripwire that would trigger a light flash, just bright enough to blind someone who wasn't ready. He didn't want to kill unless he had to. But he wasn't about to let his land be used for anything illegal. He'd earned peace, and no man, cartel or otherwise, was going to take it from him. That evening, as the sun dipped low, he got a call from Sheriff Bruce McLean. "Luther, you hear anything last night?" "Couple ranchers called about gunshots down near the river." "No gunshots here," Luther said. Pause. "You good?" "I'm fine." Bruce hesitated. "You'd tell me if something was off?" "I'd tell you if you could help." Another pause. "Well, all right, just checking." Luther hung up. He appreciated the call, but Bruce had 3 deputies and a whole county to watch. This wasn't his problem. Not yet. But by the time Bruce figured out how bad things were, it might already be too late. The following night, the air felt thicker. Still no wind. The moonlight was weaker too, drowned behind clouds that hadn't brought rain in weeks. Luther didn't bother pretending to sleep this time. He sat at the kitchen table, stripped down his pistol, cleaned it for the second time that week. Old habit. Not necessary. But it calmed his hands, kept his breathing level. Somewhere out there, someone thought they were creeping in unseen. He was going to let them think that a little longer. At exactly 1:41 a.m., the tripwire went. Not loud, just a soft click. But inside the shed across the yard, a burst of light flared, quick and blinding. Not enough to wake a neighbor, but enough to shock anyone walking blind. Luther stood, walked outside slow, M9 in hand. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He wanted them to know someone was home. By the time he reached the fence, the invader was gone. Only a torn strip of cloth clung to a barbed edge. Blood on the metal. Not much. Just enough to say someone had panicked. He turned back, not smiling, not proud. He was calculating. Later that morning, as the sun began to rise, Luther walked the western tree line where he'd found the first tracks. Today they were different. Deeper. Rushed. Someone had run. Someone big. He followed the prints a few yards, then stopped. There it was. A machete. Half buried near a rock, dropped in a hurry. Luther picked it up, wiped it with a cloth, and kept walking. This wasn't a robbery. This was a campaign. They weren't interested in stealing. They wanted to move something through, and they'd decided his land was open ground. They were wrong. That afternoon, he drove into town again. Same hardware store, different shelf. "Need anything?" Colton asked again, this time watching more closely. "Yeah? Got razor wire?" Colton raised an eyebrow. "You expecting trouble?" "No, just company." Colton handed him 2 spools. "You know you can call the sheriff, right?" "I know." "You thinking about it?" "No." Colton didn't push. Back at the farm, Luther began reinforcing the northern fence. Razor wire. Motion-triggered lights powered by a quiet generator behind the shed. He even placed a small solar panel on the barn roof for extra juice, just enough to catch movement between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. He wasn't turning the place into a fortress. He was reminding them they were being watched. That night, the lights caught someone again. Briefly, just a flash of movement by the cattle trough, then gone. No sound. No fire returned, no bullets. But the next morning, Luther found a different kind of message. Pinned to the front gate with a hunting knife was a strip of canvas. Painted on it in thick red letters, Sal del Campo, leave the field. Luther stared at it. Not long, not with fear. Just long enough to register something had shifted. They weren't just scouting anymore. They were warning. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked back inside, opened the drawer under the counter, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were 10 pages of maps, aerial shots, and a few scribbled names. Not just his land, but the surrounding properties. He marked 3, known cartel-friendly ranchers. He wasn't going to confront them yet, but he needed to know who was on the edge of this fight. As the sky turned dark again, Luther pulled the chair back out to the porch. Sat with a cigar this time, not for taste. Just the smoke, just the smell, just a warning in the wind. The farm was quiet. Too quiet for some. But for Luther, it meant one thing. The game had officially begun. But while the cartel believed they were making progress, they hadn't yet realized the man they were trying to outmaneuver wasn't defending. He was hunting. The attack didn't come at night. It came at noon. Broad daylight, scorching heat, the kind that warped the air above the fields and made the gravel shimmer. Luther was working the north side when he saw smoke. Not a column, just wisps crawling up from behind the crop rows like something trying not to be noticed. But it was too late for subtlety. He dropped the rake and walked briskly toward the far lot, boots crunching over dry soil. As he crested the hill, he saw the fire. 3 rows of corn gone, torched, burned low and quick, not a careless flame. Accelerant had been used. Maybe gasoline. Maybe worse. A metal sign, an old one that marked the irrigation valves, had been torn out and jammed into the soil like a stake. On it, written in permanent marker, in crude block letters, "Back off, or we burn it all." Luther stood in silence, watching the flames eat through what had taken him weeks to grow. Not because he was shocked, but because they'd just made a mistake. Before this, they were shadows. Trespassers. Trespassers could be tolerated, could be scared off, but this was intent. This was a line crossed. And Luther Gaines didn't take kindly to fire on his land. He walked back to the house, slow and steady. Went into the den, opened a locked trunk by the far wall, and pulled out a small black bag. Inside it, zip ties, duct tape, a flashlight, 2 extra magazines, and a thin bundle of what looked like folded clothes. But they weren't clothes. They were fatigues. Old ones, desert camo, washed and pressed like they'd never been used. Until now. He changed methodically. No rush. Every piece had a place. The belt, the knife sheath, even the gloves. When he was done, Luther looked in the mirror. Not a farmer. Not anymore. That evening, he circled the edge of his land. Not on the road, but through the brush. Off the path. Tracking. Moving silent. Not a flashlight, not a sound, just the steady scan of a man who'd spent years following men through jungles, deserts, and back alleys across continents most people couldn't pronounce. Near the south ridge, where the slope met the tree line, he found it. An old feed trough had been flipped on its side. Fresh cigarette butts. A beer can, still wet. And a tarp. Covered, barely noticeable. Hiding 2 duffel bags packed with wrapped bundles. Drugs. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. They'd chosen his land for a route, and now they were marking it. That's when Luther heard the twig snap. Not close. Not far either. About 30 yards to his left. He dropped into a crouch, staying low. Watched. Waited. And then, movement. One of them. Walking like he owned the place, checking the bags. A flashlight in one hand, an Uzi in the other. Nervous but not trained. Just another guy with a gun and an order. Luther could have ended it right there. But he didn't. He crept forward, circled wide, waited until the man knelt down to check one of the zippers. Then, in one swift motion, Luther stepped out from behind the cedar tree and pressed the pistol barrel to the man's neck. "Drop it!" The man froze. His weapon clattered to the ground. "Hands! Now!" The guy complied, trembling. Young? Couldn't be older than 23. Luther zip-tied his wrists and shoved him to the dirt. "Name?" I, Santiago. You local?" No, I'm from Juarez." "Who sent you?" "Mateo. Mateo sent us. Said it was just a farm. No trouble." Luther leaned close. "You see trouble now?" The kid nodded quickly, sweat pouring off his face. "Tell him this," Luther said. "This land's off limits. He sends another man over that fence. I'll bury him in it." Then, without another word, Luther cut the zip tie, left the kid trembling. No questions, no threats, just mercy. He knew the message would travel faster this way than any bullet. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a man is let him live to remember you. But while Santiago ran for his life, Mateo Rojas was preparing something far worse, something that wouldn't leave just smoke in its wake. They came in numbers this time. 10 men. Armed. Organized. At least better than before. They moved fast, low trucks speeding across the dried dirt road that cut behind Luther's property. 2 bikes flanked the convoy, dust clouds chasing them as they rolled to a stop just beyond the fence line. Luther saw them before they saw him. He was already in place, high in the hayloft of the old barn, laying flat with a scoped rifle trained through a jagged slit in the wood. He didn't breathe heavy, didn't blink much. He'd rigged sensors in the fields, crude trip alarms that ran along fishing lines and soda cans. 2 had gone off 10 minutes ago. He hadn't waited. Below, the cartel foot soldiers climbed out of the trucks, scanning the field. Nervous. One was already sweating through his shirt. Their radios crackled, too loud. Not disciplined. He spotted their lead, tall, built, with a bushy beard and sunglasses he didn't take off, even in the dark. Command type, Luther thought. Arrogant. Used to giving orders, not used to resistance. Luther didn't take the shot, not yet. He needed them closer. By the time they reached the fence, 2 of them had peeled off to scout wide. Big mistake. One of them tripped a wire Luther had rigged near the irrigation ditch. Snap. A flashbang went off, loud and white and hot. Screaming. The man dropped to the ground, clutching his ears, eyes wide and blind. The group panicked. That's when Luther moved. He climbed down the ladder, fast, silent, and stepped out the back of the barn, circling behind a row of rusted-out plows. One of the men broke from the group, probably trying to flank. Wrong again. Luther grabbed him from behind, drove a forearm under the chin, and dragged him behind the pile. 1 sharp strike to the temple, out cold, 2 down. Gunfire cracked through the air suddenly, wild, uncontrolled. The bearded leader had started firing into the corn rows, hoping to scare something. Anything. Luther stayed low, crawled along a trench he'd dug years ago for drainage. It now ran straight to the house. At the end of the trench, near the well, he paused, listened. A 3rd man was moving too fast, heavy steps, poor footing. Luther waited until he passed, then popped up, leveled the M9, and squeezed. 1 shot. The man dropped. The others shouted. Now they knew. This wasn't just bad luck. They were being hunted. One of them screamed, "Nos están esperando! They're waiting for us!" No one answered. Another tried to run. He barely got 10 steps before he hit a snare Luther had hidden beneath a loose board. The man went down hard, howling as a steel cable wrapped around his ankle and snapped him backward. 5 gone. The remaining men huddled near the barn, guns shaking in their hands. The leader paced, shouting orders, useless ones. "We split! 2 to the house, 2 to the east fence, move!" They scattered. Luther picked them off one by one. He moved like a ghost, using the fog from the busted irrigation line to hide his approach. A shot from the shadows dropped one. A knife in the dark took another. By the time they realized they were surrounded by 1 man, only 2 were left, the leader and a younger soldier who looked ready to cry. Luther stepped out from behind the silo. "Drop it!" The younger man did. Instantly. Shaking. The leader raised his rifle, but Luther was faster. One shot to the leg. He dropped, screaming, clutching his thigh. Luther kicked the weapon away and looked down at him. "You sent boys into a man's land!" Spit and blood bubbled at the man's lips. You're just a farmer." "No," Luther said, eyes cold. "I'm what they send when things go bad." He turned to the last man, still standing, frozen. "Take him. Tell Matteo this was his last warning. Next time, no one walks off." The man nodded, practically dragging the wounded leader toward the trucks. Luther watched them leave. Slow. Humiliated. He didn't feel proud. He felt tired. But that quiet moment wouldn't last, because Matteo wasn't done. And next time, he'd come himself. Matteo Rojas stood with both hands gripping the back of a chair, knuckles white. The warehouse in Coahuila was quieter now. No laughter, no mezcal. Just silence and a few bloodied soldiers who hadn't said much since crawling back from Luther Gaines' land. The one who'd dragged their commander, Hector, back across the border, hadn't stopped shaking. Matteo's face stayed unreadable, but inside, he boiled. 10 men, 9 down, 1 limping. One message burned into his ego. This wasn't just resistance, this was humiliation. From an old man, a black man, alone. He turned to Santiago, the youngest of the crew, the same one Luther had let go. Santiago stood near the wall, stiff, eyes fixed on the ground. "You saw him?" Matteo asked, voice low and even. "Yes, Jefe." "You spoke to him?" Santiago swallowed. "He let me go. Said this land isn't his anymore." Matteo frowned. "That's it?" "No. He said if we send more, he'll bury them." For a second, no one breathed. Then Matteo laughed. Once. Sharp. "An old soldier thinks he's still in combat," he muttered. "Fine. He wants a war? We'll give him war." He looked at his remaining crew, scattered around the room, bruised and beaten. Then at the boy they'd brought in that morning. A local teen, 16, maybe 17. Face swollen, eyes red from crying. He worked at a feed store outside Bracketville. Matteo had his name, had his routine, had his family's address. The boy had nothing to do with Luther, but he lived too close. That was enough. Matteo crouched in front of him. "You know Mr. Gaines?" he asked softly. The boy didn't answer. Matteo reached for his belt, pulled out a small blade. He didn't raise it, just let it rest between them. "You'll tell me what he's hiding, what gear he's got, who visits him, who backs him. You understand?" The boy trembled. "I don't know anything. I swear." Matteo's eyes didn't change. "Then you'll bleed until you remember." By the time the boy passed out, his shirt was soaked, and 2 of Matteo's men looked like they wanted to throw up. They dumped him by the river that night. Alive, barely. Word would get around. It did. By morning, Luther heard about it. He'd just finished checking the traps when Colton called. Boy's name was Trey Morales, worked at Navarro's feed barn. "What happened?" Luther asked, already knowing. "Some say he was taken, worked over, dumped near the Pecos. Hospital says he's stable, but he won't talk. Not yet. Who found him?" "Rancher near the bridge. Trey had your name in his pocket." Luther didn't say anything. Colton hesitated. "I don't mean nothing by this, but if this is about you, maybe it's time you loop in the sheriff." "No. You can't fight this alone, Luther." "I'm not fighting it," he said, voice calm. "What would you call it?" "Finishing it." He hung up. The wind blew dust across the porch. The coffee sat cold in his cup. And something inside Luther, something he'd worked years to quiet, stirred. This wasn't about trespassing anymore, wasn't about product routes. It wasn't even about pride. Matteo had touched a kid who never held a weapon, never crossed a fence. And that meant something else entirely. Luther went inside, sat at the table, reached into the drawer, and pulled out an envelope with Ruben's name on it. He opened it. Inside was a small thumb drive and a contact list. Ruben had said, Only if the fire starts. The fire had started. Luther plugged the drive into an old laptop, booted the system, and accessed the list. 10 names. One stood out. Angelina Vega, a U.S. border intelligence analyst out of San Antonio. Retired, but still had friends in the right shadows. Luther clicked her number. The call was brief. Angelina. Luther. Long time. I need eyes on a man named Mateo Rojas, based out of Coahuila, ties to cartel movements near Del Rio. I'll get what I can. Do it fast. He crossed a line. A pause. How bad? Luther looked out the window, watched the horizon shift as the sun dropped behind the field. Bad enough to end it. But while Luther was preparing for the final blow, Mateo was already on his way, this time, to finish things face to face. Mateo didn't bring a crew this time. Just himself, a duffel bag, and a black SUV with Mexican plates scrubbed clean. He left it parked a mile down a dirt road, far from the farmhouse, hidden behind a stand of thorn bushes and a cattle fence that hadn't been mended in years. The sky was heavy and grey when he started walking, heat still rising from the earth, buzzing with tension. He wanted it this way. No distractions, no screw-ups, no more underestimating the man on the hill. Luther knew he was coming. He'd been watching the road through a pair of old Steiner binoculars since sunup. The perimeter was quiet. Too quiet. The dogs at the neighbor's ranch hadn't barked once. That's how he knew Mateo wasn't rolling deep this time. He was coming alone. And that meant he had something to prove. Luther didn't panic. He didn't even move. Just waited until Mateo stepped onto the gravel path that led straight up to the porch. No words. Not yet. Mateo stopped 10 feet from the steps. His shirt stuck to his back, sweat lining his brow, duffel hanging heavy at his side. "You really think you won?" he asked, voice low. "I'm still here," Luther said. "You're not. That tells me enough." Mateo dropped the bag with a thud. From inside, metal, sharp, intentional. "I could have brought 20 men," Mateo said. "You did." Mateo's jaw twitched. Luther stood slowly. No weapon in his hand, but that didn't matter. He didn't need one yet. "I gave you warnings," Luther said. "You ignored them. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." Mateo laughed, bitter and short. "You think I care what happens to this dirt? These fields? I've crossed bigger men than you. Made them disappear." "I'm not looking to disappear." Mateo took a step forward. "You think your past scares me? Delta Force? Combat medals? You're just an old man with a scarecrow and some booby traps." Luther stepped off the porch. No sudden moves, just presence. "You're right," he said. "I am old, but old men don't fight with ego. They fight to end it. You ain't here to win. You're here because I embarrassed your pride." Mateo's nostrils flared. He kicked the bag toward Luther. "You know what's in there?" "No, but I know it doesn't change anything." Mateo crouched, unzipped it halfway. Inside, C4, enough to level the barn, maybe more. Luther raised an eyebrow. "That your answer to getting your teeth kicked in?" "It's my answer to being disrespected." Luther stared at the bag. "You came here to burn what you couldn't take." "I came here to erase it." Luther took a slow step forward, now standing just 5 feet from Mateo. "You want to die out here?" Mateo didn't blink. "You think I won't?" "I don't think," Luther said quietly. "I know men. You're not here to die. You're here to be feared. But I don't scare easy." Silence. Just the wind rolling through the tall grass and the long seconds between breath. Luther's eyes dropped to the bag. "You light that fuse," he said, "and no one walks away. Not you. Not me." Mateo smirked. "Maybe that's the point." But his voice cracked at the end. Luther saw it. That flicker, the hesitation, the man who came to destroy, but didn't plan past it. "You've lost men. Product. Respect," Luther said. "You don't get it back by dying. You get it back by surviving smarter." Mateo didn't answer. His hands twitched once, then stopped. "I let your boys live," Luther said. "That wasn't mercy. That was message. You cross this line again, no one's left to send one." Mateo looked up. Eyes narrowed. You gonna shoot me in the back? No, Luther said. I want you to walk away. Why? Because a dead man don't spread fear. But a beaten man? Word gets around. Matteo stared, breathing hard. 1 long minute passed. Then he stepped back, picked up the bag, turned without another word and walked off the way he came. Luther watched him go. Didn't relax. Didn't smile. He just waited until the dust cleared and the road was empty. Then turned back to the porch and sat down. Same spot. Same old chair. But while Luther had won the fight, the war had left something in its place. Something that didn't settle as easily as dirt. 3 days passed. No trucks, no scouts, no flickers of movement in the brush. Just wind, heat, and the groan of the old porch boards when Luther stepped out with his morning coffee. It wasn't over. He knew that. But for now, it was quiet. He'd walked the land twice since Matteo left. Checked the lines, the traps, the sensors. Found nothing but animal prints and the tracks of his own boots. He'd even visited the field where they'd burned the corn. He didn't try to fix it yet. He just stood there, staring at the charred stalks. They'd grow back, eventually. Maybe not this season, maybe not the next. But the soil would hold. It always had. Later that afternoon, the sheriff stopped by. Bruce McLean, dust-covered hat in one hand, a plastic bottle of iced tea in the other. Luther met him halfway down the drive. "Heard you had visitors?" Bruce said. Luther said nothing. Bruce sighed. "Feds picked up chatter. Intel from someone named Vega. Said she got a tip that Rojas had crossed the line. They found a few bodies out near the river. Clean work. Scared the hell out of the ones who survived. Wasn't me," Luther said flatly. Bruce studied him. "You know, people around here look up to you. They may not say it, but they know this land stayed safe because of you. I'm not looking for thanks." Bruce nodded slowly. "Just figured you'd want to know." "You won." Luther turned toward the field. "That's the thing, Bruce. You win wars, but peace? You gotta earn that every day." The sheriff let that sit a moment before tipping his hat and heading back to the cruiser. Luther walked back to the porch. He sat down, same spot, laid the pistol on the table beside his cup. Not for show. Just part of life now. Later, a neighbor drove by. Slowed, waved. Luther waved back. The message had spread. The cartel would find easier routes. Matteo might live, but he'd never forget the farm that taught him about the wrong kind of enemy, a man with nothing left to lose and no one to impress. Inside, Luther made dinner, just beans and cornbread, the same as always. But tonight, it tasted better. He left the radio off, let the silence do the talking. Outside, the land breathed again, slowly, cautiously. He'd always known peace wouldn't come with folded flags or polished medals. Peace was in the walking, in waking up and deciding to defend what you loved, without needing a reason. Before bed, he pulled a journal from the drawer, wrote 2 lines. "They came here thinking it was just a farm. They left knowing it was a fight." Then he turned out the light. If you believe peace has to be protected, not just wished for, share this story. Let the world remember Luther Gaines, a man who wanted quiet, but fought when silence was broken.